Grandaddy Dirtbox and I'm back. And just moved into new digs, so feeling good, thought I'd make a quick video. The first chapter. You know, it's a new series I'm doing. So we're going to be reading from Oscar Kiss Maerth. The beginning was the end. Now, this book, I've had a few copies of this over the years. I lost one. I destroyed one. And I saw it recently and I thought, go on, I'll get it again because it's in my top 3 books of all times. In fact, it's number 2. Behind the good book, the Holy Bible. Now, number 3, that always shifts and changes. Possibly Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Even though it's dark and occultish, but, a lot of things are. Now, let's read the blurb on the back. A shattering new theory of evolution. This startling bestseller poses a devastating new theory of evolution that explodes the accepted concepts of Darwin. It claims that man evolved through the cannibalistic practices of primeval apes, that intelligence can be eaten, that the cannibalism of his ancestors still preys upon the conscience of man and has caused him to lose his innate powers of extrasensory perception. The beginning was the end is a book no man can afford to ignore. Well, it's a comical book. It makes me chuckle. Now, a lot of people think I'm a bit grim, because it's a book about cannibalism. They're like, oh, they get the shivers. They're like, dear me, gosh, you don't like that, do you? I'm like, yes, I do. Now, I'm not into cannibalism. I've never eaten another human being knowingly. But who knows, There's a lot of strange things that go on in this world, and I've had a few funny tasting burgers in my time, so I don't know. Now, Chapter 1. The Newcomer Without a Memory. Let's do it. Man is a newcomer on the earth. He can remember neither the hour of his birth nor his origin. For a long time he fancied himself the centre of the world as he imagined it, and by God's will its appointed master. He placed himself at the apex of an imaginary self-constructed pyramid, and he has had to climb down from it step by step in the course of the last 2,000 years. He stands at present on the lowest step, but he must now retreat even from there. He must learn the truth concerning his origin and himself. Okay. No man can remember the hour of his birth. Now, it's starting with the truth, You don't remember being born. I kind of do. I don't know why, but I feel like I can remember it. But it could just be my mind playing tricks. He can't remember the hour of his birth, not because he has forgotten it. He has never consciously experienced it. Yeah, you did. So we know we're in the land of bullshit, it'll go under anthropology, this book, but it's not. It's a fiction. But a funny one. Anyway, birth is a passage to a new consciousness, and in the course of it, what has been known before sinks into the subconscious. Now, I'm going to have to trip my way through a few typos in this book. It's a cheap, old, pulpy paperback, but pretty rare these days. Hard to get hold of. I think it's been shadow banned. So, if you can get hold of a copy, I recommend it. I highly do. But you might be paying a few quid for it. Fortunately, I saw a copy of it and it was going cheap. I was like, I'll get that. Go on, I'll treat myself. I deserve it. Mankind as a species had an hour of birth too, when it left its animal condition and the process of human development was completed. This was a decisive passage to a new consciousness. At that time, something extraordinary happened in the human brain. Knowledge of the past was submerged in the subconscious, and simultaneously a new consciousness began. On account of this occurrence, and on account of it alone, the human species, in spite of its exceptionally high intelligence, is unable to remember either its origin or its earlier existence. Only since that time has man been confronted by the tormenting question: where do we come from? What are we? Why are we? Where are we going? Now, I think I know the answers to all of those, but, I'll keep going. No one was able to answer him. I could. He's dead now. Oscar kissed Maerth. Hopefully he wasn't eaten. But, if he was around, I'd have a little word in his shell-like, and I'd say, I'll lay it on you thick and gloopy like the knowledge, the wisdom. Oh, dear gosh. Anyway, no one was able to answer him. For the witnesses of his birth, the animals and plants were silent. His surroundings held their peace. Curious and uncertain, he began to answer these questions himself. He established that he was superior to his brothers, the animals, and that he surpassed them by reason of his intelligence and cunning. He recognised that he was able to shape matter according to his own ideas and for his own ends. He wandered over this earth and found no end to it. He looked at the sun, the moon, and the stars, and these seemed to move around him. This led him to an egocentric and self-laudatory hypothesis concerning himself and the world. God alone stood above him. For man, the world consisted of the earth, which was flat and firmly anchored. A lot of people still believe that, don't they? The sun and all the stars circled around the earth. He, man, not he, man, he, man, lived on the middle of this flat earth and was the crowning achievement of creation. Because the world for him was only the earth. God had created him with his own hands, and he was the favourite of this God. Indeed, he was God's representative on earth. Only through man was meaning given to the creation of the world. Indeed, God had made man in his image. So, if man wanted to see how God appeared, he need only look in the mirror. His mission was divine. Only he, and no other living being, had a soul. He alone was called to know God, to recognise him, and to praise him. He was to rule on earth and preserve and effect divine justice and harmony. He was to improve all God's works on earth, more to finish God's uncompleted work through his own progress. God had given him intelligence in a high degree for that purpose. Now, it's talking as if all that's a load of bollocks when it's not, it's true. But I'll keep going. Strengthened and encouraged by this self-formed theory, he placed himself at the apex of his imaginary pyramid, and from there he sang his own praises. Thus self-deceived, he set about his divine special mission. He wanted to govern the world, but soon became aware that he could not govern himself. This gave him his conscience no rest. He felt that he was deluding himself with his theory, for it was too attractive. Reality, however, was quite different. He saw that animals and plants live harmoniously in the framework of a divine order, which he was unable to do, and felt that in himself something was lacking, which was necessary for his happiness on earth. Certainty in and satisfaction with himself, and harmony and peace with his fellow man and the world around him. He searched in desperation for the meaning of his existence and could find none. But he never openly admitted this, for such an admission would have stamped him as an imperfect being. With ever-increasing doubt in his heart, he remained at the apex of his imagined pyramid. Then, 2,000 years ago, his peace of mind was deeply shaken. A Greek maintained that the earth was not a flat disk, but a sphere. This disturbed man's notion that he was placed at the centre of the earth, for there is no centre on the surface of a sphere. He was forced to take a hesitant step down from his pyramid and consoled himself with all that remained of his imaginary world. But the earth was still the very world for him. The sun, the moon, and the stars circled round it, and he was still God's favourite creature, created by God himself with his own hands so that he could delight in him. He was still the cleverest being in the world, and the only one to have been given a soul by God. Then, 400 years ago, man had to sustain a further shock. Here we go. It was established that it is not the sun that circles round the earth, but the earth that circles round the sun. The man who demonstrated this also discovered that many of the planets, he says plants, but it's planets, dear gosh, some even larger than the earth, circle round the sun. This was bitter news. Man's special place in the universe took on a still paler hue. Reluctantly, he climbed a further step down from his pyramid and consoled himself a second time with the remains of his idle conception concerning himself and his world. He was still left master of the planet, which had been selected for him by God, and he was still the crowning achievement of creation, destined to rule the world. For there was only one sun and only one inhabited planet, and that was the earth. This and this alone was the world, and by God's will man was the cleverest being in this world. Only a few decades later, more bad tidings came to light. A Christian monk had the courage to affirm that there are millions of much larger suns with thousands of millions of planets circling round them, many of which are 1,000 times larger than the earth. This was too much for man. He felt deeply insulted, and persuaded himself that God was insulted by such a theory too. A holy tribunal which stood under the direct patronage of God therefore condemned the scholar to death and had him burnt alive. Thus was God's authority re-established. But almost before the smoke from the fire at the stake had dispersed, man, humiliated and shaken, was forced to take one further step down. For proof of the truth proclaimed by the scholar they had burnt was overwhelming. So there were indeed millions of suns, and thousands of millions of planets. Man consoled himself again with what remained of his theories. He was still the crowning achievement of creation, and the only being with a soul. God had created him so that creation might have a meaning. For God wanted to have someone who could value him so that he might step forth from his solitary and anonymous position. The creature, newly come to earth without a memory, was still convinced that without him the world would be an incomplete, an unhappy place. Even God himself would be unhappy. It was only about 500 years ago, when trading seafarers were visiting distant peoples and civilizations more frequently and hearing different myths and theories concerning the origin of man, that people became more critical of their own. For according to different civilizations, man was said to have been made from earth, from water, from the scent of flowers, from fire and lightning, and even from a drop from heaven itself. In India, one man once lived under the earth, and only at a later stage caught hold of the tails of the cows as they grazed, and was pulled up by them. Other peoples believed man to be a direct descendant of unions between the gods. This imaginative genealogical tree put man in a thoughtful mood. There could not possibly be so many different truths concerning his descent. He began to investigate and to dig. He found the 10,000-year-old remains of the bones of his forebears. But these were no different from his own. He also found much older ones, and to his astonishment he had to accept that the older these were, the less their resemblance to his own bones. What disturbed him still more was the circumstance that the older the skeletons discovered were, the more marked their resemblance to those of the great apes. Fossils of bones which were 700,000 years old faced those carrying out research with the question, should these be classified as human remains or ape remains? For both descriptions, ape man and a man ape, are equally true. Then, barely 150 years ago, scholars proved that man was no more created in his final form at the wave of a hand than were the other living creatures. He is the result of evolution. They also established that man's forebears were man-like so-called hominid apes, whose near connections, chimpanzees, gorillas and orangutans, are still alive today. What was found and discovered also made it clear that the development from animal to man took place in several hundred thousands of years, but this must be considered singularly rapid and unique. There are no parallels in biology for such development. Evolution, load of bollocks. Come off it, man. This bitter news oppressed man still further, when so much had already been whittled away from his special position in the universe. His divine origin and his divine mission were even more open to question. Faced with these proofs, man had no option but to accept his descent from a hairy animal. His divine origin... I've gone back again. My bad. But he scrupulously avoided describing his ancestors as apes. He named them ape-like creatures, for man, though deposed from his throne, does not want his ancestors to bear the same name as those hairy creatures that he laughs at the zoo. He climbed down yet one more step from his once so high pyramid. Now he stands on the lowest step, and consoles himself with the remaining scraps of his once splendid conceptions concerning himself and his imagined world. But he begins to worry about his soul. He puzzles about whether he acquired it when he was still an animal, or not until later, when he was killing his fellow man with a stone axe. How can an animal have a soul? Yet how can God reward man killing man by giving him a soul? Or might it perhaps be that animals have souls too? They don't. This would be the worst possible explanation, for that would leave nothing at all of man's special position and divine mission on earth. So he passes over this in deep silence. But man does not give in. He now tries to explain his origin and subsequent descent by means of the will of God, or at least of an order created by God. He does admit certainly that he is the outcome of development from animal to man. Talking about man like it's just a one big homogenous blob. I mean, everyone's got their different ideas, come on. But he says too that this circumstance does not rule out his special divine mission. For evolution itself is a process brought about by God or by nature, and he can still have been chosen by God to carry out some special divine task. Spurred on by this notion, he devotes himself now to his new problem. By hook or by crook, he means to prove that he is the product of natural evolution. Feverishly, he seeks proof of this. And when he comes up against phenomena indicating the contrary, he turns them around until such time as they fit in with the picture his wishes have already prepared. He explains everything he does or does not do, and all the physical and spiritual attributes he possesses or does not possess, so as to produce a natural development. And what is more, he explains them as representing progress in relation to animals. Oh dear. Even when he is secretly ashamed of his deeds and shortcomings. He clings desperately to this new theory. For now, he is already standing on the lowest step of his once so high and fantastic pyramid. There below at his feet are the animals which were surely created to serve him. At all costs he means to avoid moving down to the ground. He, the image of God. But he has no option but to climb down from the last step and place himself on the firm ground of reality. The truth concerning man's beginnings and the consequences of this truth will run round the earth causing profound shock. All former ideas concerning human life, human goals and human progress will waver and collapse. The human species stands at the opening of a new epoch, which is at the same time its last epoch, for it is heading inevitably towards the final phase of its existence. Man is not the outcome of either natural or healthy development. He did not come into being in the framework of the universal laws of cosmic order. Man himself, against all the rules of natural evolution and against the order of nature, made himself by manipulating his own brain. The road from ape to man was made up of a chain of criminal acts, contrary to the laws of nature. Man has become the lunatic genius of the universe, whose diseased mind, with its absurd objectives, is necessarily and inevitably becoming his doom. Man still esteems himself and the process which he began some 10,000 of years ago, and which he calls progress. He does not know that this progress is the product of his disturbed mind, with which he is accelerating his inevitable destruction. He draws comfort in the sufferings he has brought upon himself from his supposed progress. From it he expects the happiness he has not found. But deep in his soul he feels more and more clearly that he is the victim of self-deception. And a presentiment tells him that he is facing fateful times which he cannot grasp and cannot control. In the quiet before the approaching storm, he holds his breath. He listens, fearfully, to the distant rumbling of thunder, and hopes, as he listens, that his senses are deceiving him. They are not deceiving him. Chapter 1 done. Alright, so you might want to read that, you might want to get hold of it. Now, the pictures in the book, pretty disturbing, alarming stuff, and possibly racist. I mean, I didn't do it, it's not me, but let's have a quick look. Let's have a quick look at this. Okay, so there's a guy there with a severed head. What else? Oh, This is a disturbing one. Deary gosh. She's got some saggy tits. Oh, okay, here we go. Look at the skulls. Look at the shapes of the heads. And then he starts comparing humans to apes and monkeys, chimps and orangutans and baboons. Deary gosh. Yeah, like I said, I think it's near enough been banned, this book. Can you say it? Can you say it? Right, so that's it. The beginning was the end. Man came into being through cannibalism. Intelligence can be eaten. It gets more exciting. I don't want to give any spoilers away, but, you know, it gets pretty interesting. And I think very funny. A silly book, but I enjoy it. All right, all the best. God bless. Hope you have a wonderful day or night or whatever it is. Throw up the praises to the one who amazes always is, yes, is night and days is. That's what a says is. Okay, is. And I'll catch you on the next one. And we didn't come into being through eating brains. Pretty sure of it. Yeah, we are made in God's image. And he loves us. And we're his favourite creation. So, simple as that, right? Catch you on the next one. Ta-ta, kiddos. Ta-ta.